Welcome to the Jessica Papineau Show, living aligned, styled with purpose. The podcast where transformation begins and your next level life is waiting. I am Jessica Papineau, founder of CSJ Styling, and I believe that when you align how you present yourself with who you truly are, magic happens. Your confidence expands, opportunities open, and you step into the life you were meant to live, not just with style, but with intention and purpose. But here's the truth. Most women don't even realize what's holding them back. They feel stuck, second-guessing themselves, waiting for permission to shine. I've been there. I've seen what happens when women stop playing small and embrace their full potential. That's why I do what I do, because I know that transformation isn't just about clothes. It's about stepping into your power, owning your presence, and feeling completely aligned with the woman you're becoming. And that's exactly what this podcast is here to help you do. Each week, I'll be your guide, sharing insights, strategies, and mindset shifts that unlock the confidence you've been craving. You will hear from powerhouse women who've transformed their lives, practical steps to elevate your presence, and the little-known secrets to showing up fully everywhere you go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Jessica Papineau Show. We have Kim Witczak in the house today, and I'm so excited to share her with all of you and her incredible story. And Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm super excited to have this and meet your audience.
So I'm going to share a little bit about Kim. Kim Witczak is a nationally recognized speaker, drug safety advocate, and brand strategist who helps leaders and organizations find clarity at the intersection of messaging, meaning, and mission. After losing her husband to an undisclosed side effect of an antidepressant, Kim turned personal tragedy into a 2-decade mission, taking on Big Pharma, serving on the FDA advisory committee, and becoming a leading voice for transparency and for change. So welcome, Kim. I can't wait to have this conversation because, you know, there's so many things, and we talked, we had a call, like a week or so ago, and you shared so many things with me about the FDA and all of these drugs that are out there on the market that people just are not aware of what they're taking. And it was mind blowing to hear this. And I really just want to get right into it today, Kim, because I know your story, it's so powerful. And it's, you know, all of the triumph that came out of the tragedy that you went through, and really how you discovered yourself, you know, through going through this experience. So Kim, could we just start? Could you share a little bit about, well, number one, share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well,
and then we can kind of go in from there.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really interesting when you know, the way you introduced me. You know, I was kind of like everybody else, like blindly trusting, just living life. Life was good. I was married. I was living, you know, doing advertising. I'm an advertising producer, traveling the world, like living life, and thinking I had everything in control, until one day I got a call, and I was out of town on work, and this is really where my story, you know, the story of my own personal tragedy, but also the triumph when I look now back 22 years ago. But it was August, it was the middle of the summer. I was out of town on a shoot, and I hadn't heard from my husband all day. So I asked my dad, I'm like, hey, Dad, do me a favor. Go and check on Woody. He's been having trouble sleeping. And so I haven't heard from him. And both of us, you know, we both traveled a lot for work. And so it wasn't unusual that I hadn't heard from him. So I thought maybe he was out of town, or not out of town, but like busy or something. But anyways, I hadn't heard from him. So I'm still on the set, and it's like 9:00 at night. And my dad calls, and he's like, it's bad. I'm like, what do you mean it's bad? And it's like, he's dead. I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean he's dead? I go, how do you know he's dead? And I'm just sitting there and like, I felt like I was floating out of my body, like hearing those words, he's dead. And I go, how do you know he's dead? And he's like, he's hanging. I'm like, what? And literally my husband had just started a dream job with a startup company, was having trouble sleeping. And he was not a guy that had trouble. Like if he didn't have 8 hours of sleep, he was a guy that would literally at a dinner party would fall asleep at at the table, and I'd kick him like, wake up, whatever. So anyways, he went to his GP, his family doctor, and was given a 3-week sample pack of an antidepressant, Zoloft, and told him it would help take the edge off and help him sleep. And so here he did, he's following the rules. He was like a guy that always, he's Humpty Dumpty, and he was also a military kid. So if and authorities, if the doctor said to do it, you do it, whatever. Right. I happened to be out of the country the first 3 weeks he was on the drug. I was down in New Zealand on a big BMW production. So I'm having the time of my life. And meanwhile, Woody got started on this medication because Woody had no history of depression. He wasn't depressed. He just wasn't able to sleep. And so I'll never forget when I got back from my trip and I was like super excited to see him. And he walks in my back door and completely, he's bawling, which he's not like, I have not seen him cry. Like that isn't something I would see of him, but he was completely drenched through his blue dress shirt. He falls to the floor and his hands wrapped around his head. He's like, Kim, you got to help me. I don't know what's happened to me. My head's outside my body. You got to help me. I don't know if I can handle this again. And I'm looking at him like, what? And so we calmed him down. We breathed, we prayed, and eventually he called his doctor. And the doctor said, you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. And literally every night that next week before I left, out of town, he was saying, what do you think about acupuncture? I'm going to beat this feeling. What do you think about hypnosis? Like everything was this beat this feeling of his head. And I remember even saying to him, Woody, if this new job, like we set ourselves up that we could always live off of one salary. And if it's too stressful, like go back and get a salary job. Like you don't need to do this. I remember like saying that, and he was like, no, this is like his dream job. And it was a startup and all that. And so that night, as you can imagine, my entire life fell apart. And as I'm like, go back, and I didn't even know, I was in shock. I went back into our studio and I said, hey, Mike, one of the guys I was working with, can you bring me back to the hotel? There was like a family, and like I have my like holding it all in, right?
Oh my gosh.
I was like, there's been a family emergency, and because I didn't want to like cause people to like freak out or something on the set. We get in the car and I'm like, Woody just killed himself. And he was like, what? I'm like, yeah, I don't even know what to say. And so we go back to the hotel. But that when I was there, my dad at this point called my mom, and my sister and her husband came over, and the coroner got on the phone and asked me one question. She goes, was he taking any medication? And the only medication he was taking was Zoloft. And she goes, we're going to take it with us. It might have something to do with his death. That was the first clue. Also, ironically, the front page of our newspaper had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. That same day that Woody died. And Woody did not leave a note. Like we left notes all the time because we both traveled. Like he would throw notes in my bag, or if he was out of town, he would leave a little note in my car. And it was usually, I called it the honey-do list, like, hey, can you go, whatever. But he left no note. And I remember like the biggest trip of your life and you left no note. But in some ways, I think those were his notes, like in a divinely orchestrated way that I can say now. So as you can imagine, my whole life fell apart, and my brother-in-law went home that night and Googled Zoloft and suicide, had no idea that the FDA had hearings on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac in 1991. And it was all these family members coming forward and telling their stories. And almost every member on that advisory committee took money from pharmaceutical companies making antidepressant products. And so literally he's doing research. He didn't sleep at all for a week because he was like, Woody, like, he goes, I know depression. Woody wasn't depressed. Like, Woody was running during this time. He was like, he was pretty anal. So he kept track of how many miles he ran on his running shoes. And, and meanwhile, I remember after his funeral, I was like sitting in the basement. And for anybody who's had anything, that's gotten a phone call or any kind of like grief, heartache's real. Like I mean, it's a real pain. And I still can go like this and feel it. I literally tried to scratch my heart. Like I had scratched my, and I just kept praying over and over, God, take my pain and use it. It does me no good. Over and over and over. Because I just wanted this thing to go away. I had no idea what that prayer was going to start. Meanwhile, Eric, my brother-in-law, is praying, like, what do I do with all this information? And he brings it to me. But, so we were both praying. And then we had the biggest sign of I can't even imagine. And now I share it because we were in the middle of Lake Michigan, where Woody always said when he died, throw his ashes in the lake, don't bury him in the ground. He was a big environmentalist. And Eric and I, again, my sister's husband, we were standing at the edge of the boat in the middle of Lake Michigan. And I'm holding Woody's ashes. I'm like, I cannot believe this is like what we turn into is ashes. But literally, we look down in the middle of the lake, right there on the side of the boat. And there's this red book, literally like Hollywood movie, open book floating by. And it's in gold letters. It said, I go, does that say what I think it does? And he was like, yeah. It said the Holy Bible. And that floated by. And in that minute, both of us were like, for me, it was like, God was saying, trust me. And he was also saying, Woody's with me, but this is way bigger than you even can imagine what this is about. So it became like this was our sign of like, we're going to DC. And so started heading out to DC. I call it the battle for Woody, did a bunch of stuff at the FDA. We eventually got black box suicide warnings added to the drugs because in 91 they didn't. And 13 years later, it's now approved for kids. We have Zoloft and Paxil on the market, and we were blindly trusted, and we're smart, and we got blindly, kind of sideswiped, right? And I had a big lawsuit against Pfizer. I mean, I've never done any of this. Like, it just took this whole thing, like, took over, and really, that's why I call myself the accidental advocate, and so, yeah, that was over 22 years ago. It'll be 22 years in August, which is like, and I'm still doing this work. I thought for sure I would have quit by now, but I think sometimes we don't get a choice in our purposes. Sometimes our greatest purposes choose us.
Yes.
And I feel like this was a purpose that I was kind of given, and I took it and ran with it.
Hi, it's Jessica, and if you're a high-achieving woman ready to align your presence with your purpose, I'd like to invite you to apply to join my Align to Rise Mastermind. This is an exclusive community designed to help you elevate your style, amplify your influence, and connect and collaborate with like-minded, high-achieving women on a transformative journey. Inside, we will explore strategic styling, personal branding, powerful collaborations, and mindset shifts that will position you for the next level of success. It all starts with a free styling call where we will uncover how to align your wardrobe with your goals and find out if the Align to Rise Mastermind is the right fit for you. Book your complimentary call today at csjstyling.com and take the first step towards becoming the woman you're meant to be. This story, and I know those that are listening right now are probably, and I've heard your story a couple of times now, and I saw you speak actually at Amberly Lago's Unstoppable event, and listening to your story, I mean, I'm imagining, and I'm sure people are imagining what it would feel like to go through something like this and be blindsided with, a man that is not suffering from depression. So it's not like, there was any expectation of something like this happening. And I just cannot even begin to imagine what that feeling was like for you. But what I find so powerful, Kim, when you shared, when you were with Woody's ashes and you were looking at the water, I think sometimes people in their lives are not fully awake to what's going on around them in terms of like what signs are there, what they're being called to do, because they're so in it and in their lives. And I'm sure at that moment when the Holy Bible like is coming by in big bold letters, and I don't think books float, do they? Don't
No,
they?
they sink
Okay.
because they get
Okay.
waterlogged and they sink.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. I'm like, wait a
Yeah,
second. I
no,
don't
they don't
think
float.
that that is something that can even actually happen.
Mm-mm.
So, I mean, the fact that in your grief, in that moment, you were awake to what was in front of you. And I'm sure, when you describe that story, that really was the beginning for you of this advocacy, of the knowing. And, I think when people have this knowing, because obviously you did, like there was something inside you, and I know you describe it as fire, and we'll talk about that. But you had the knowing that it was your responsibility, that even in your grief, that you were called to do something, to take action. And can you talk a little bit more about that, about the Holy Bible, about what that signified for you, and how deeply you felt that fire? Because that was not in your personality. That's
Mm-mm.
not, because you described to me, we've talked before about, Woody really was the one, right? That was that
Mm-hmm.
person. Can you just speak a little bit more to that? And then I want to dive into the other piece of all this with
Sure.
Pharma.
It's funny. So Woody was the guy. I was like, I'm a producer, so that means I'm behind scene. I'm
Yeah.
very comfortable being behind the scene, right? And Woody was a big outgoing personality. He took on issues like they were taking on. He wanted me to get involved. They were putting two competing cell phone companies cell towers in our neighborhood, like on the corner across the street. And he was like, no, you're blighting our neighborhood. Let's go around and get everybody in the neighborhood to sign petitions. And I'll go down and bring in and, present it at the city council meeting. And I looked at him and I'm like, have fun. You'll never win, Woody. Like, and you'll never win. It's cell phone tower companies and the city council. And he goes, I'd rather try like hell and lose than do nothing at all. And I'm like, all right, well, have fun. I mean, that's who I was. And then
Yeah.
when something like this happened, in some ways, I feel like Woody passed the baton to me, like his spirit when he left the world. He was like, here's an assignment. And I have to say it was not anything that I would have originally ever have chosen, but something intuitively at every part of my body was like, he wasn't depressed. Like he wasn't depressed. I remember going to a suicide support group and I was like, and they're still like 10 years later talking about like the suicide. And they literally patted me on the head and they're like, oh, honey, we never saw it coming. And I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. Like I felt myself like, oh, no, no, no. Like I became mama bear. We don't have kids, but I became very mama bear protecting over Woody. So that was probably a little of the start of the fire. Right.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait, we're smart. We're educated. We trusted. When your world explodes into a million trillion pieces, it's an opportunity and a gift in some ways to get to put it back together and also question things that don't make sense. Like, why do we always say that? Like, why do I believe this? I don't know. Did that just inherently come into the world with me? My parents have told me, like doctors are better, smarter. They know everything. Like, I mean, all of a sudden you question everything, right?
Yeah.
And also when I look back at those families and if anybody's ever interested, just go on YouTube and put the 1991 FDA Advisory Committee on Prozac, and you'll see family after family after family telling these horrific stories.
Yeah.
And then watching the FDA say nothing, I'm like, wait, why not? Like, if they didn't do it, like, I now have the opportunity to make sure that somebody who comes after me
Yeah.
doesn't have to like experience what we did. Like, I met so many like parents whose like little kids were getting it for test anxiety. All the people that I had met during this time were
Yeah.
getting it for non-depression related, which is what the
Yeah.
drugs were approved, right? And so I felt like, why not me? And I felt something so deep inside. And then that sign of the Bible was like, because who would think like the FDA and Pfizer, like these are like massive companies. But
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. Well, first of all, God's way bigger than them. And so that's one thing. But that was my sign. And I realized that thank God Eric also saw it, because otherwise people would be like, oh, she's a grieving widow. She's seeing things, you know. But that became literally, and I've gone over, like I've been out to DC, I don't know, 40 some times during that time trying to get warnings. And there were all kinds of congressional hearings. And I ended up at the US Senate testifying, which I'm thinking, I mean, what world am I living in right now that I'm testifying and doing all this? But, I still have to, like, people were going, "Oh, she's so brave." I'm like, "Well, I didn't feel like I had a choice." And maybe I did have a choice,
Mhm.
but I
Mhm.
didn't feel like I had a choice. And
Mhm.
maybe that's, when I start looking back at our lives and all of us, because I think all of us come into the world with a purpose that's been designed for them. And and people experience horrible things, but maybe it's all perfectly designed for us and not happening to us. Like, I wasn't a victim. And I could also hear Woody, because he wasn't a victim. He'd be like, are you kidding me? Like, get up. You are not going to be like sitting here and just letting your life fall apart. But I'm not going to lie. That was one side of my life.
Yeah.
But the person that was an outer Kim. And then
Yes.
I had very much of an inner Kim that
What
I
was it?
had to
Tell
go.
us about inner Kim.
Yeah, that inner Kim was not the person that people on the outside saw me.
Yes.
They had no idea. Like, I would say, they saw me as brave. I did a lot of media. I wasn't afraid of doing that for some reason, because I think I trusted that Bible that was floating, which was a sign. But I had like two sides. I felt like over here, like, God doesn't really care about my life. I mean, this is a big mission for him. Like, but this isn't
Yeah.
like, he doesn't really care about my life. So I was struggling with, I'd go home to an empty house. I would like fall apart. Because then I would be out there doing this and, the big advocacy work. I'd come home to an empty house, and I'm like, how's this my life? Like, how am I going to rebuild
Yeah.
this life, like who I am? And, and I don't want to lose parts of me. And I also want to take what I've learned. But I wasn't this person. I was like, I recently was talking to my mom, and I go, Mom, was I really like, I found all my report cards. I go, was I really this, like, the girl who never said anything in class? And she goes, yeah, we always thought it was such a good thing. Like, you sat in the corner. The
Mm.
teachers always said you were such a good girl. You never stirred at the pot. You never like made noise. And I go, truthfully, Mom, like, that sounds really boring, but I know that's who I was. Like, I didn't, but I didn't share a lot about what was really going on. And I even told my mom and dad, she goes, you never caused any problems. Your sister was always the one that was like, you know, like, really, I was the oldest. And so she was the next one. Right. And she was
Mhm.
like always smart, like smart, smart mouthing my mom and dad, and like whatever she talked
Mhm.
back to them. I never did. I never even cried. I cried to my cat. So like
Oh,
my cats knew, and I loved my cats. Like, my mom's like, you did? I go, Mom, you guys I had this whole other side in me that I
yeah.
didn't know that I even mattered, or like,
Oh my gosh, Kim.
like, does my voice even matter? But then I found a way, like being
Yeah.
behind the scenes and like advertising, which I love because I love creative and I love
Yeah.
fashion. I love all this stuff. And that was a space where I could shine. But
Yeah.
all of that, like, that was the little girl that I came into the world. And
Yeah.
so I had to really, that's the part where I think the transition really happened, is like, for a long time, I gave a lot of the power away. Like this was still Woody. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, 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 no. Finally, like in the last probably couple of years, I'm like,
Yeah.
Kim, Woody didn't do this.
Yeah.
You did this.
Yeah.
He was your like, he was
There's
your
your
muse.
power. There's your fire.
Yeah, like he didn't do this.
Yeah.
You didn't back down. And it might have been that little girl who was in you that
Yeah.
was like, fight for me, right? And
Yeah.
so maybe I was fighting for her while I was fighting, for
Yeah.
Woody and all the voices and watching these families and like, and so I feel like I can look now and I always say through probably one of the most painful, horrible experiences, like
Yeah.
Woody's death, I found my life. I found in
Mm.
this experience, it didn't happen overnight.
Mhm.
But it really was about, wait, that same Bible that was floating, that wasn't just for the fight, the battle for Woody. That was for me too. And
Yeah.
those signs, like you started that question off about signs. Like
Yeah.
I think sometimes signs are whispers and it's like an
Mm.
inner knowing, that little voice inside you. It might be that little girl that's like, no, you can do it. And
Yeah.
then I think there are signs that are like, okay, you're not paying attention. Like when I should have broke up with somebody a long time ago because I numbed myself with a relationship after Woody died. And I felt like finally everybody was like, okay, you're not listening to any of that voice that you talk about. So we're going to rip this out. And now you're going to go back and heal both. You're going to go back and heal the relationship that you never did of your heart because you were running from it. And I felt like, I also had to sit like all of this experience. I realized that there is something about having to sit in the pain and not run away.
Mm.
And I
Mhm.
wanted to I numbed it with a relationship. Sometimes we numb it with pills and alcohol, whatever.
Yeah.
I wanted to numb it away. But I realized when that all fell apart, I had to go back and sit. And then that's where, like, that's where the magic is. That's where, like, that butterflies, like, it's in the
I knew you were gonna bring up the butterfly, and
yeah, well, I love
and
butterflies.
for those of you who are listening to this and not watching on YouTube, um, we have Kim sitting here with her beautiful purple top and her butterfly necklace, and which is actually one of the things that drew me to you. I had full chills when we got on that call and you were wearing it, but it's like you're describing, like something has to die for something to be born. Like that's just what keeps coming to me as you're
Mm,
talking, even and sitting here at my desk, looking at your butterfly, and it's so beautiful. You are so beautiful, Kim. I
oh,
mean, and my one of the biggest things that what I'm called to do really is, help women to step into this fire, step into this full power, allow it to like be shared. Because once you let it out, like you let this fire, you know, just like come out of you, and look at the impact that it's made on this world. And it unfortunately took tragedy for Kim to be, allow herself to be fully seen in the world. But look at this beauty that's come out of it.
mm,
i'm just
thanks.
i'm just so in awe of you and everything that you've been through in your life.
Well, it's funny. I think back, I mean, honestly, like, I'm just an everyday right? An everyday person, meaning I didn't come into this world to, but we all come into this world, I believe, as creative beings, these
Yeah.
little souls that are meant to self-express. And it's
Yeah.
what I would tell all of my, like I had helped start an organization before Woody, and that was my real passion before, which was working with kids abused, neglected, at risk, using the power of art and mentors.
Yeah.
And I remember like looking at them and like labeling and yeah, they've had horrible things that happened to them, but at the same time, like we all come into this world to be self-expressive, and then life kind of shuts us down, and
Yeah.
sometimes we I mean, we spend our whole life trying to find it again. Sometimes it hits us in the face, like getting the phone call or,
Yeah.
you know, you lose your job. But instead of, yes, I'm not going to lie, it's scary. It's scary, scary, scary when you get that, when that happens. But also if you allow it to, like, what can come out of it, because I don't think God ever leaves us in ashes, and you know that beauty does rise from ashes. And I really thought a lot about this idea of fire, and because that was what was inside me. It was the fire, it was anger, it was
Wow.
everything, right? But sometimes, like, fire is the impetus, and
Mm,
it is the impetus that you realize, like, something wasn't right, you got treated wrong, or like, and instead you can be the victim,
yeah.
or you can actually go, oh, I'm going to use whatever this is inside me. And that's what I did. I used it, and I talked a little bit about it on the stage at Amberly's event, but the fire framework, that
Yes,
I've really
sure.
thought about it. And really, for me, I've used the fire, and as you know, as power, right?
Yeah.
But fire for me, actually, I break it down to, like, F for faith, and like faith in something that is greater than yourself. And that if I didn't have the faith, like, that's all I had. Like, when I remember coming
Mm,
home, and I grew up, like, I always wonder, I'm like, what are they talking about? Like, have a personal relationship. I don't even know what that means, right? Then when I got home, and I remember just going, all right, God, I guess it's you and me. Like, I don't have a husband anymore. I was just like, started talking. And
yeah.
then I started with, like, I remember I went to the suicide group, and then that was awful for me. So I ended up going to a grief share at church, because I felt like I needed hope, and I needed something forward thinking, and not when, especially when I saw people that were still like 10 years, I'm like, I cannot have this for 10 years. This is not who I'm born to be. And I remember somebody gave this talk, and it's what I love. And it was all about the mustard seed. And it was the faith. All you need is the faith of a mustard seed, which is tiny if you've ever looked at it. Because I got a packet of them that I bring, and I also have a necklace that I wore almost every day during this period. That I would look and say, that's all the bigger it needs to say, move, mountain, move, and nothing will be impossible for you. And so faith is a huge part of the fire for me.
Yeah.
And the I is intuition, intuitively listen. Your body that's where the speaking comes from. Like, you can hear, like, when you're still, because trust me, I tried to keep myself as busy as I could. But when I came back and just still, like, those little thoughts that come to you, the ones that are coming from here, not the ones that are that other voice, which is like the other voice, they talk to each other sometimes, the roommate in your head, as I call it.
Yes. We all know what you're
Yeah.
talking
The roommate in
We
your head.
all have her.
Yeah, we all have. I tell her to leave. But that, like, intuitively, like, if I, like, if something doesn't feel right, doesn't say, like, or if you feel being called to something and it's like pulling you forward, that's, listen to that intuition in your body. The body is so wise. Our,
Can I stop
well,
you for one
yeah.
sec with intuition? Because I know the women that are listening to this podcast, those are the women that's my audience. Like, that's who I serve, is that woman that is reconnecting to that. And
Mm,
as you mentioned about, like, as we live our lives, we kind of, as women sometimes lose that because we're listening to what the expert says, like the doctor tells us, or our parents tell us, or, someone in some type of an authority position, like our teachers or whatever. And then that reconnection to that intuition in our body, and really trusting that, and how you're describing it. Like, I just want the listeners to really, connect to what you're saying right now, because had you not connected to that intuition, imagine how different your life would have been, and you paid attention. I just think it's so beautiful, and your framework is so beautiful that you're sharing this with other people, and you can share it through your story, because not everybody has a tragedy that stops them dead in their tracks, and they
Mhm.
continue to not be awake in their lives, to go through motions in just the everyday motion of their life, and not really have that
Yeah.
purpose because they haven't trusted that intuition. I love this. I'm sorry to
Oh,
interrupt. I
no,
just
I do
wanted to
too,
really
like, that
highlight that.
voice.
Yeah,
Yeah, you know what? It's absolutely, because that voice, like, even when you go, like, let's say you go to the doctor, right? You just mentioned the
yeah,
doctor, and it's maybe for your kid or something, and you're like, I don't know, that doesn't seem right. Like, anytime that something is like, that doesn't seem right, there's nothing wrong with like stopping, questioning, because that's something, it's one thing when you sit there and you're like, is this coming from fear? Or is this
mhm,
coming from a different, like, it's like distinguishing, is this like my fear voice? Or is this like, this be strong and courageous, voice, where it's like, because I feel like in some ways, this is how we're all connected to spirit, right? Like as a
yes,
soul, it speaks to us. And I think I mean, obviously it's how we're made, right? So we all have it, but sometimes we just move and, like we're almost afraid of being, I was afraid. I mean, I was always on the road. And I remember even Woody would be like, do you ever just like slow down? I'd be like, nope, 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 let's go. I
yeah,
was a producer. And so, and then when I was forced to, I mean, I was forced because after Woody died,
right,
and then you start, wow, like these voices, this voice. And if I didn't follow it, I can't even imagine. I can't even imagine. And everybody around us and my brother-in-law especially was like, I don't think you should, this is a big deal taking on Kim and
yeah,
taking her down a path. Like this could be really bad for her. And I think my brother-in-law all the time, I go, Eric, if you didn't listen to the intuition that you had, that this is something you had to bring to me. And then I was like, oh yeah, this, and I listened to it. It would be very different. It'd be
yes.
very different.
What I find interesting, and I know we keep hitting on this intuition thing, but I think it's really everything. It's the catalyst for every decision that we make. Do you find, and I know I do, but do you find when you have that whisper or that knowing that sometimes on the outside, that people are not, that there's resistance on the other side? And do you find that? Because I know I do.
Hmm. Yeah, I think, you know what? Because sometimes what your voice is saying may not necessarily, because you got to remember somebody on the outside, it's through their lens. And
Yes.
so even if you're like, oh, I feel like I want to go do this new career change, or I want to go try something different, or I want change, or I want to try out, like whatever it is,
Yeah.
but somebody on the out, like the naysayers. And I love The Alchemist. It's a book, The Alchemist, and the journey, and the naysayers. And sometimes it's your parents, sometimes it's your husband,
Yeah.
sometimes it's your siblings, sometimes, but that's their lens. And that's
Yeah.
where I think you always have to, like, there's a distinction. So that is where you might run up to resistance. But if you
Yeah.
stay true to what you feel you're being called to,
Yes.
whatever it is, or if you're like, I want to go do the move, or anything like that,
Mhm.
I think you have to really listen to those voices.
I agree. And what I've found in my life is that when I have that whisper or that knowing, I'm very careful of who I share it with,
Mm.
because like my husband, if I share it with him, he's like, oh, trust your intuition, because he knows every time I've had an intuition and followed it, it's like it always works out the way that I say it's going to. But
Yeah.
when people don't, other people that don't connect to their intuition, when you share something that you're doing with their lens, it doesn't make sense to them. It's not theirs, so they're not going to know. They're not going
Right.
to know. Only you know, because you got the whisper.
Yeah, you got the whisper, and
Only you
sometimes it's
know.
a hammer, but, like, that whisper is super important. Like, I remember just, where I realized there were times that I didn't trust the intuition. Like, I did this big interview. We were just, they were going to do a multi-page spread in the Minneapolis Star Tribune on a Sunday. It was multiple pages, and it was called The Battle for Woody. It was a beautiful article, and a multi-page, like it was a big deal. And in the middle of the night, I got this whisper that said, you need to call them and make sure that they put your new website in there, launching it. And I'm like, no, Kim, come on. Of course you mentioned it. And it kept, and I'm like, and I didn't listen to that whisper. And then the article came out and it wasn't in there. And it was like, sometimes like, where did that whisper come from? And so like, that's where I call it, even like the intuition, and those hits might come at 3 a.m. and we're afraid of being woken up at 3 a.m. But sometimes 3 a.m. are the best wake up calls. I call them it's when your body's quiet and you can like listen instead of being afraid of them, like, oh, be curious about them.
Yeah.
So anyways.
I love this. I love this whole conversation. But Kim, there's something I really want, if you can just share, a little bit about what happened, like this class action suit that you were a part of and spearheading that. I want people to understand like how powerful you are, like how big this actually was. Can you just share a little bit about, what you went up against? Because you went up against Pfizer. And you won a class action suit. So can you just like share just a little bit about that? Because I want people that are listening to understand how big this is and how much resistance you must have had along the way, and you kept going.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, so first of all, it wasn't a class action. It was literally Witczak v. Pfizer. So I'm like,
oh my gosh.
Okay, yeah,
no, I had that wrong.
It was
you
like,
went straight up against, because there were other people.
There were other families. So during this time when Woody died, there were a lot of other litigation there were a lot of suicide lawsuits, but they were getting thrown out because the FDA was intervening on behalf. And the guy who became chief counsel, he created this playbook called the amicus brief, preemption. So basically saying, even if the company wanted to warn, we're the FDA, we wouldn't have let them warn, which makes no sense. But people don't realize that the guy who's created that at the FDA got $300,000 from Pfizer before he went in there to start intervening in all these lawsuits. And so Woody's case, we beat preemption because we exposed that guy. He eventually left the FDA and went to become the global chief counsel for GlaxoSmithKline afterwards. So these guys like rotate in and out. Like it's a system, it's a business. But I will tell you that was probably the scariest thing I've ever done, because like I don't do lawsuits. I remember always thinking like, oh my gosh, they're dumb, they're frivolous. Like that was what the narrative that I had bought into, right? And even like, the one that always got talked about was the McDonald's where the woman puts hot coffee between her legs.
Yes, I remember this.
Yeah. And everybody's like, I'm like, well, she's like, come on, like you put that in your leg. Well, I come to learn from this that lawsuit was pivotal for the temperature of coffee that the fast food restaurants now serve, because they made it way hotter so that it was to do with cleaning out the, it was cheaper for them to just boil it really hot versus having to clean out the system or the new. So there was like a reason that they did it so hot. So anyways, when I had this lawsuit, I mean, I was kind of naive too, but the games that they played, and I think part of it was I realized the deposition when I was deposed for 9 hours. And before that, like Pfizer would call up my therapist and say, we want Kim's all her therapy notes. And they did that completely. They went around talking to my neighbor. Like it was awful. But you know what? I think this is where the naive or the fire comes in. Because I think my mom's like, aren't you afraid? I'm like, no, I'm not. Because I felt like I was surrounded by a light bubble and I had God's armor on me. Like I knew that this was not about money. This was about exposing wrongdoing.
Yes.
You guys knew, like you guys have hid this side effect and it's called akathisia, and it's like this inner, like, I want to scratch, I want to move that head outside the body. They kept that from the public, they kept it from the doctors, and they've known about it. And then when you get into litigation and you get all these documents out from under seal, and you see that the FDA knew about it, that Pfizer did 13 studies and only used 2 to get it approved, but the other 9 were in their files. And it's only in another country, when they went through and looked at it, that it showed that the highest rates of suicide were 1 to 30 days, 50 milligrams, and 31 to 40 years old, all 3 woody. And so when I would see these documents, I think that also fueled my fire, because it really was about, like, you guys knew, and woody was just acceptable collateral damage. Like, all of us are just considered acceptable collateral damage. No, there's somebody's love in their life. And so it just fueled me. Those documents fueled me. But the good thing, when Woody's case, what happened is we beat preemption, which is why most of them had gotten thrown out. And so that then helped settle a lot of other cases for the other families. And
So you spearheaded the whole thing.
yeah, I mean, I just was like, and I also feel like it was divinely appointed that my attorneys, like, they're amazing. They've been fighting this for years. They're advocate attorneys. Not all are this way. They would work with me, helping me get documents, because what I realized out in DC, again, they would call us anecdotes. These are just anecdotal stories. They didn't happen in the double-blinded, placebo-controlled studies, which, by the way, the companies are the ones that are responsible and create and control the data. But anyways, when I saw that, it's one thing to tell the story, but when you see in black and white, on letterhead, their letterhead, the FDA, the drug companies, it tells a truth that, no, I don't need to say anything more. I just need to show you, and and all these families. And so I still love the legal. It's not an easy road for people. In fact, it's a really hard. I feel very fortunate. And I think it was part of a greater plan of exposing the whole, like, I now talk about it with med schools, the spider web. And it's and that really came out of my background in advertising and marketing. So I understand how marketing works. And then, and also, like, most people don't know that the US is only one of 2 countries that allow drug ads, period. And so the other country is New Zealand. So that, even though they say church and state, the reality is it influences the kind of media, the art, like, who's going to really go and truly investigate when they're your largest advertiser on your network. These are all things that I, came to understand that I never before Woody probably ever thought about, because I just blindly trusted that safe and effective was meant that it meant something. Like, it was in advertising, we always had the good housekeeping seal of approval. Like, we'd be like, yeah, we would want to use that. And, like, if we were working on a brand, or Best Buy, or Consumer Unions, or Consumer Report, Best Buy for a car, because I did all car stuff. And so that was like a big, like, you would want to highlight it. Well, I used to think that's what FDA stamp of approval, safe and effective. Like, it's the same thing as a good housekeeping seal of approval, but it's not.
Yeah. Well, just thank you so much for trusting your intuition and bringing this to light. And I just, I hope so many that are listening are really seeing the power of connecting to that inner voice, that inner intuition, and not taking action because they don't want to be big in the room. And so you're such an inspiration, Kim, and and you're going out there now and speaking. And so and that's part of this too, is I want those that are listening to really know, these are things that you continue to advocate for. The education that you're providing out there is just, it's incredible. not only to the medical and legal world that you're doing, but also how you're speaking into women, how to trust their intuition, how to be big in the room and feel good about being big in the room. And so how do people find you?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm just going to say I never thought that my voice mattered, but I will tell you this, the power of a voice can, and let me tell you, your voice does matter. So if there's something you want to take on, it doesn't, we all have different things, right? And thankfully we do, because that means the world's better, right? But
Yeah.
one voice is like the butterfly effect. You
Mm,
go and then you inspire and then you do, and it becomes like
mm,
a butterfly effect. So I'm telling you that your voice 100% matters, and there's nothing wrong with doing whatever. It could be a quiet voice, it could be a loud voice, it could be something, it doesn't matter. It's just like it's in you.
yeah.
And so people can find me at my website, kimwitczak.com. I also am on Instagram, Kim_Witczak. And then I do a lot of my advocacy on um, formerly known as Twitter, X, at Woody Matters.
Yes.
And I also I do writing on a Substack on
Yeah.
acceptable collateral damage.
And you're also creating a book. There's a book.
And I'm also writing a book.
Yes.
I'm having to really lean back on that Bible, because it's kind of scary. I'm telling stories that I haven't really told, that I've kept to myself. Certain parts of my journey from the beginning. And that is, I've been writing it probably my whole life, but really for the last 20 years,
Wow.
it's time. It's
Yeah.
time. Because if I can inspire, it's not going to be all like what I did out in DC, but it's about inspiration that one voice can start a movement.
Yes. And that's what you've done. Thank you so much, Kim, for coming in today and sharing your story so vulnerably with all our listeners. And I'm so grateful for you, grateful that you came into this space today. And thank you,
Oh,
thank you,
thanks.
thank you. And I highly encourage those that are listening to, begin following Kim, read her Substack. I love Substack. Kind of get in there and dive in, get into her world, because it's really a beautiful one, and you'll learn so many things. And those that have possible speaking engagements that you really see Kim for, reach out to her. She is inspirational. I got to see firsthand at Unstoppable the impact that you made on that audience. I mean, I looked around as you were speaking, like I could feel it in my body. I had full body chills, but I looked around the room, and in real time people were like, they were really taking pause and thinking about their lives and thinking about their beliefs and what's truth and what isn't, and like, I better reconnect to myself. So I highly recommend that you go in and really dive into Kim's world and what she's doing. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Thanks for people taking the time to listen to this very important work that I wish I had 22 years ago.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And we'll chat soon. I hope today's episode sparked something in you, a shift, a realization, or even just the permission to step more boldly into the life you're meant to live. If you loved what you heard, don't forget to hit the subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you're feeling inspired, I'd love for you to leave a review. It is the best way to help more women just like you discover this show and start their own transformation. Want to dive even deeper? Connect with me. You can find me on Instagram at @thejessicapapineau, or head to csjstyling.com to explore how we can work together to align your style, confidence, and the vision you have for your life. Thank you for being here, for showing up and investing in yourself. Until next time, remember, you are worthy, you are powerful, and when everything about you is in alignment with your vision, you become unstoppable.